guys, and in this video we're gonna look at this atmospheric techno patch from scratch, and I will describe it step by step, track by track, and also describe some modulation and mastering bus as well, just like I did recently for Omri Cohen's awesome Symposium video. Okay, let's start with a kick drum. Let's solo this track and I just highlight it there. So the heart of this is a horror deep module, boosted bass drum. I used the module 1 for the drive, also decreased this envelope, which adds extremely useful decay of the distortion. Also, the important parameter here is amount of decay. With less decay you will not get that sub-bass decay at the bottom of your mix, so it's important to set the decay of the groove and tempo for your patch, and of course you have to tune it right a bit in tone with the other instruments. You need to get a good sub-bass control to get the precise tuning, and of course it will be grateful for your overall groove of the track or patch. So pitch envelope is just acts like a transient shaper in this case. So yeah, that was about deep module. The next in the chain is a manic compression. With a bypass it sounds like not pretty much okay, but it adds a really bumpy sound to the track. I just used threshold full down to the 10 dB, gain reduction, and then ratio about 3. Short attack, quite short release, but not always, because you need to present your sub-bass pretty well, so just control it by amount of filling punch, something like that. Awesome thing in this compressor is different curves for attack and release. Just set it by ear. And the next important module in this chain is a mixer between the clean, deep, and processing through the shaper with a clip mode. So I choose the curve here, like between X and inverted V shape. And when you connect this CV cable to that, this goes from the LFO and pass through the Bokeh audio sleeve. You can get some kind of dry wet processing and adjust it by transforming attenuator here, attenuator. You can also switch to the linear mode, just as you like it. And the last step in this chain is a shaper. I use the clipper, my favorite one. You can set different oversampling, its effects on the high frequencies. So yeah, that was a kick. Let's hear this in the mix again and try to adjust some parameters. So you can hear the punchiness is increasing when we try to increase the pitch envelope initial tuning, and this is what's going on when you try to increase the clipper amount. So yeah, this is how decay affects on overall mix. So don't hesitate to increase this parameter, is pretty important, very important for the techno patches. So the next one is a bass track. I start with a source to add a note to the granular format mode of the palette. As a trigger source, I used one of mu graph output. And so yeah, I choose the second octave, set the timbre like that, adjust the ratio just by taste, and applied some internal modulation, pretty shapy, and apply, this is pretty important, the unison on voice 3 and apply some spread. So the next step in this chain is a compressor, and it really adds a feelness of pushing through the speaker, so cans. And the next one is a poly, because the next one is a mani compression and it doesn't respect any polyphonic inputs inside here. Is just not simple compressor as a previous one, because it's sidechain bus and it receives the output from the kick drum. Let's hear this simultaneously. Let's increase the level of the bass track. Pretty nice. Let's continue with the bass track alone. So for the sidechain, you probably need to add a feelness of some unstable behavior of the attack and decay. Just full throttle threshold here and similar settings to the kick regarding attack and release. Maybe different one with the curves. So with the bypass, it's just two-way in the front of the mix, which will be messing without that. Not quite bad, but if you want to place your sound just a little behind the kick drum, is a nice way to sidechain through it and choose the settings you like. So the next one is electric ensemble from Flag, and it's pretty cool actually for this purpose. I just add some mix to compensate those spreadness behind the compressor, and it's kind of creative way for adding some stereo mush around the speakers. But in the next module I even add the fluctuations in the below 100 around the high amount of the specialness, and I used LFO for that. Bassmaster is a pretty nice module to experiment for modulating the width of your tracks. And the next one is the clipper. Let's compare this to smooth, and clipper really adds sharpness into the sound. Okay, let's switch to another track, and it is ARP. So I just start with a sequence, but leave alone with just D note. I use mu graph as a trigger source as well, but in this case is a 2-operator FM, just with a little bit amount of internal modulation. Also there is some gate, I believe, or this is square LFO modulation from this BPM LFO. This is also coming from LFO. Yeah, this is also has 3 unison voices and just a bit of spread. Then it's purchased to the vocal slap and controlling also by the same trigger. There is no such sharpness in the rhythm, no rhythm at all without this trigger. And I believe I was decided that slap is also add some needed decay to tame it with the other patch elements as well, especially with the kick drum and the bass, because it's play in different frequency region and it's important to keep it rhythmically how it sounds in English, rhythmically related. Just playing a little bit behind the mix, and it's pretty nice, I believe. So the next step is a debriatus. I just add some a bit of modulation to the crush and fold parameter and add overall saturation, and then polyphonic output goes through the stereo wave filter, which is notch is pretty amazing tool and really can add some fluctuation. I forgot to add that it's important to include equalizer to the description of this patch. So let's start with the ARP. As you can see, I just cut a lot of mid-range. Because it has a completely different sounds in terms of overall processing and including master bus. So yeah, you should consider EQing while doing a great sounding techno patch. So I also cut a lot in the bass. Just sound distorted without that. Just because a lot of processing apply. And the same behavior in the kick drum, but not such a big difference in the sound, but it adds overall structure of the techno track because the kick is the king. So let's switch to the percussion elements, and it's solely, sorry, not this one. It's not solely applied to the palette and granular cloud because it's pretty unstable in terms of repeatable notes. It's good for adding some of those fluctuating percussion sound. Since the shaper doesn't support polyphonic input, I also used a sum module and then compress it, highly compress with high attack and release, not high, just middle attack. Should just place it not forward in terms of talking about speakers. And there is this nice modulation solution. I just add LFO, one of those BPM LFO to the quantizer and just filter it to C note and then pass it through the shaper. And in terms of that, we're getting just kind of this. Let me show you on the scope. Just step it, ramp it, sine wave LFO. And it's pretty nice in terms of modulation. So that was a percussion. Let me show you also processing modulation applied to the mind mill mixer itself. Is a modulating volume by one of those LFO and Bogardia slew again. Nice, and this is also unipolar BPM, and I just switched this offset of panning of the percussion and just decrease pan CV level a bit. Also, high pass and low pass filter is pretty important in terms of getting the overall sound good. Just cutting through some kick, high frequencies, bass is actually highly reduced and arp highly reduced, but you can still hear them, and since mid-range is important to tame in the techno patch as well, and it's nice to keeping turning on your high pass and low pass. So let's switch to another instrument. Is a Percussion 2, track 5. Is triggered by Boolean logic. Triggered the snare drum mode of the palette. You can hear that pretty smooth sounding. It doesn't sound like a snare at all. And EQ is playing an important role in this routine, and also use kind of fluid random modulation with elephant and palette. Pretty cool sounding. Soothed overall track, just add a specialness, and I just applied random module for the panning. Without it, it's just pretty boring with those kind of normal delays. But with that, it adds like a real human plays around the atmospheric techno patch, like that. So the hi-hat is pretty straightforward. I just use SV modular and choose the sample I like, and that's all. I believe there is some cut on the shelf cut on the high end, top end. Also filtering, applying a bit. Since the modular melt mixer has a pretty 6 dB cutoff on the high and low pass filters, it's pretty nice to just tame out, don't cut a lot with these filters. This is pretty cool. And this is third percussion track, just driving with clock divider coming through mu graph. And I use the same snare modes, but just with total different settings around here, and decrease attack with the EQ master as well. Also apply some panning modulation, slow modulation with BPM LFO. And the last track I used as a chords. Chords is driven by palette, controlled 1 volt per octave with a F note, and just experimented a bit with affordable chords for this patch. It's not finished with this chords oral patch. So I also used 3 voices on unison, just spread a little bit and apply polyphonic outputs to deprivatus to highly saturated. Sorry, wrong track. Without the saturation, it just loses everything, those snappiness of the pressing chord, and then it proceeds to the Starway and amazing 4-pole bandpass filter just with a kind of default settings, and I'm done with that. In terms of sense in this track, I highly experimented with EQing sense. It's pretty important to get rid of any unwanted reflection from reverb and delay. Also, it has a filtering. Filtering is absolutely must to get a clean patch and punchy, leave enough space special elements. So I also used return levels a bit to increase the perceived width of the track, and I'll also slightly increase the width on the channels, sense channels. So the last one is a master bus, and it's pretty important how it's patch overall sounding. I mean, highly important. I start with the bass master in this and just cut everything inside channel below 100 Hz. It leaves to the kick drum enough space because kick drum has a lot of low frequencies, and decline from volt is pretty game changer in thing. Just make sure you don't listen pretty hard at high levels, because I don't know how it sounds without it. So let's get started. No comments here, is just game changing. Let's stick with the parameters. I just add a huge low shelf bump. I added through the patching, so I can get this overall patchiness in VCV rack, just because in Ableton I used a lot of EQing on each track, a lot of bands or so. So I just add a low high shelf bump a lot and cut the mids to prevent this boxiness, and cut also the harsh frequencies around 3K to make the sound more smooth but not losing in punchiness. And I highly recommend to have the high shelf in pretty airy region. You just lose the clarity when disable it. So it really improved the overall sound with just 2 clicks. Pretty amazing. Many compressor works as the only compress on the side information. I just experimenting with aromas window, with ratio settings and attack and release, and made a conclusion that is for this particular patch with a lot of sides smoothing sound, I don't want to compress the overall stereo or just mid channel, only side channel, and fucked up with the input gain. So try to compensate the difference in volumes just by using your ears. You can clearly hear just it increases the it's absurd, but it increases level of the kick drum and everything inside channel, because sides elements just stays in their place when bypassing. Pretty cool effect for the master bus indeed. And one of the last thing on master bus is a capacitor. I just a little bit with the high pass and the low pass, and you can see the difference when you turn dry wet pretty fast. Not so obvious, but listen the hi-hat decay as well. And now it's just tamed out, and the kick drum is dominating in terms of taking places, and also the attack of the kick drum somehow making it more smooth. And the last thing on the master bus is a clipper. Recently I found that limiter is not suitable for most genres at the last step, the master chain. So I use just hard clipping and making sure with this view meter on the record bus, that everything is not pushing highly through the zero. And so that was my review of this patch. You can get this patch on my Patreon as well. And thank you for watching, guys. I hope you liked this video. See you next time.